It was supposed to be just another ordinary flight. The Boeing 777, gleaming under the afternoon sun, sat on the tarmac at New York's JFK Airport, engines humming softly as 211 passengers settled into their seats. Families chatted, business, travelers opened laptops, and children pressed their faces against the windows, eager for the view from above. In seat 27A sat Emily Carter, a 16-year-old high school student with a love for aviation. She had been fascinated with airplanes since she was a child, spending countless hours on flight simulators at home and devouring every documentary she could find about flying. But to her, it was just a hobby, something that felt safe behind a computer screen. She was traveling with her parents to Los Angeles for a family vacation. The excitement in her eyes mirrored the thrill she always felt before takeoff. Emily had no idea that in less than 3 hours, she would be sitting in the pilot's seat of this massive aircraft, with hundreds of lives in her hands. The flight took off smoothly, climbing through clear blue skies. Flight attendants served drinks. Laughter echoed through the cabin, and the pilots chatted casually over the radio. Everything seemed perfect, but perfection can shatter in an instant. About 2 hours into the journey, the seatbelt sign dinged softly, not for turbulence, but for something far more urgent. A muffled announcement crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, if there is a doctor on board, please come to the cockpit immediately." The cabin murmured in confusion. Some passengers looked around, searching for a doctor. Emily's father frowned, whispering to his wife, "That's unusual. Must be a medical emergency." Minutes later, 2 flight attendants rushed toward the cockpit, faces pale and eyes wide. They disappeared inside, and the heavy door sealed shut. The usual calm chatter from the pilots over the speakers was replaced by an unsettling silence. Inside the cockpit, Captain Mitchell, a veteran with over 20 years of flying experience, was slumped over the controls. His co-pilot, First Officer Harris, was frantically checking his pulse. The captain's breathing was shallow, his face pale. It was clear he was in the midst of a serious medical emergency. The crew sprang into action. One attendant ran for the onboard medical kit, while another grabbed the emergency oxygen. But as precious minutes passed, it became clear that the captain would not be able to continue flying. First Officer Harris now faced a nightmare scenario, flying and navigating the aircraft alone. Across the country, with a sick captain beside him, and an increasingly anxious cabin behind him. The tension in the air was growing thick. Emily, still in her seat, noticed subtle changes. The smooth hum of the engines felt different. The planes turned sharper. She caught a glimpse of the flight attendants whispering urgently in the galley. Their voices hushed, but their faces tight with concern. Her curiosity, mixed with instinct, made her lean over to her father. "Dad, I think something's really wrong." Before he could reply, the intercom came on again. This time, the voice of the first officer carried a weight no passenger ever wanted to hear. "Greater than ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing an unexpected situation. Please remain calm and stay seated. We have everything under control." The words "under control" were meant to reassure, but to Emily and many others, they did the opposite. She had watched enough real cockpit footage to know that pilots rarely make such announcements unless the situation is truly serious. In the cockpit, First Officer Harris was already on the radio with Air Traffic Control ATC. "Greater than Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Flight 482. Captain incapacitated. I am the sole pilot on board." Controllers in Denver, who were handling the sector at the time, immediately cleared other traffic from the area. The plan was to divert the aircraft to the nearest major airport, where emergency medical crews could meet them. But there was another problem. The weather, at their nearest diversion point, Kansas City International, had suddenly worsened, with heavy crosswinds making a solo landing extremely difficult for even an experienced pilot. Harris needed help. Back in the cabin, passengers were starting to panic quietly. A man in business class asked loudly what was going on, while a mother clutched her child tighter. Emily's heart was pounding, but her mind was alert. She remembered something important. She had trained on flight simulators specifically for Boeing aircraft, including the 777. She didn't think of herself as a pilot. Not really, but she could read the cockpit layout almost like a map. She knew where the throttle was, the autopilot controls, the flaps, and the landing gear lever. She had no idea that within the next 20 minutes, this knowledge would make her the unlikeliest hero in aviation history. The call from the cockpit came unexpectedly. A flight attendant walked down the aisle, scanning passengers. Her eyes stopped at Emily. "Miss, could you please come with me?" Emily's parents looked confused. "Is something wrong?" her mother asked. The attendant hesitated. "The co-pilot needs to speak to her. It's urgent." Emily's father frowned, but nodded. "Go ahead, sweetheart." As Emily walked toward the cockpit, the reality of the moment sank in. She could feel the eyes of dozens of passengers following her. Some looked curious, others frightened. She pushed open the heavy door and saw the captain lying unconscious, oxygen mask over his face. The first officer looked exhausted, his shirt damp with sweat. He glanced at her and said words she never thought she'd hear in her life. "I'm going to need your help to land this plane." And just like that, Emily's ordinary trip had turned into a life-or-death mission. Emily froze for a split second, her mind racing. The cockpit smelled faintly of coffee and electronics, the hum of the engines vibrating beneath her feet. Outside the windows, the endless sky stretched in every direction, calm, silent, and indifferent to the chaos inside. First Officer Harris's eyes locked on hers. They weren't just desperate, they were calculating. He had to decide, in seconds, if trusting a teenager could help save 211 lives. "Greater than you've flown before?" he asked quickly, his voice tight. Emily swallowed hard. But I know the Boeing 777 layout. I've studied it." His jaw clenched. That wasn't the reassurance he was hoping for. But it was better than nothing. The radio crackled with the voice of air traffic control. "ATC, Flight 482. We understand. Your captain is incapacitated. Do you require assistance with the approach?" "Harris." "Affirmative. I have a passenger here with some simulator experience. We'll need step-by-step guidance." There was a long pause before the controller replied, his tone sharper now. "Greater than ATC. Copy that. Tell the assisting passenger to strap in and follow instructions exactly." Emily slid into the right-hand seat, the co-pilot's seat, while Harris shifted to the captain's chair to access primary controls more comfortably. Her hands hovered over the yoke, not touching yet. She was close enough now to see the endless dials, screens, and switches familiar from her computer monitor at home, yet overwhelming in real life. "All right," Harris said, breathing steadily. "We're going to divert to Kansas City International. Weather's rough, but it's our closest safe option." Emily nodded. "What's the wind speed?" He gave her a quick, surprised look. She was thinking like a pilot already. "Crosswinds at about 27 knots. That number made her stomach tighten. She had handled simulated landings with crosswinds before, but never at this speed, and certainly never with a real aircraft carrying over 200 souls. As a TC began reading out headings and altitudes, Emily reached for the autopilot interface, adjusting the settings exactly as instructed. Harris kept glancing at her hands. They didn't shake. "Not yet at TC. Flight 482. Turn right, heading 240. Begin descent to flight level 250. Harris right to 200, down to 250. Emily, repeating softly to herself, right 250, down to 2. Her voice was quiet, but her focus was absolute. In the cabin, word had spread that a young girl was helping the pilot. Passengers whispered nervously, some clutching armrests, others praying. Emily's mother sat stiffly, hands white-knuckled, around the seatbelt, her mind torn between pride and terror. The descent began. The nose of the plane tilted gently down, and the distant city lights of Kansas City began to flicker on the horizon. But the weather was worsening. Patches of dark clouds rolled in fast, and turbulence rattled the fuselage. Harris toggled the seatbelt sign. "It's going to get bumpy." Emily gripped the yoke lightly. She remembered a trick from her simulator. "Practice. Don't fight the turbulence too hard. Let the plane ride it out, then correct smoothly." But this wasn't a simulator. This was real, and every bump made her heart pound harder. Suddenly, an alarm blared in the cockpit. Wind shear warning. Harris cursed under his breath. Great, just what we needed. Wind shear, sudden, violent shifts in wind direction and speed, was one of the most dangerous conditions during landing. Pilots trained for it constantly. Emily had simulated it, but never imagined facing it here. ATC, Flight 482. Be advised, we have strong gusts near runway threshold. You'll need to correct aggressively on short final. Emily inhaled deeply, steadying her voice. "I can do this. Just talk me through it." Harris began his quick briefing, as if cramming an entire flight school lesson into 2 minutes. "On final approach, you're going to need to crab into the wind, nose slightly angled into it, then straighten out just before touchdown. Keep your airspeed steady. Don't let it drop below 145 knots. Emily nodded, absorbing every word. She had practiced this maneuver countless times, but never with stakes like these. They were now 15 minutes from touchdown. The cabin was quiet except for the hum of the engines and the occasional clink of a loose tray in the galley. Every passenger could feel the plane's slow, deliberate turns as it lined up for the approach. Harris gave her a firm look. "All right, Emily, I'll handle communications. You fly the plane." The words hit her like a jolt of electricity. She wasn't just assisting anymore, she was flying. The runway lights were now visible through the windshield, glowing faintly through sheets of rain. The turbulence was worse here, tossing the massive aircraft side to side. Emily's hands were firm on the yoke, her eyes locked on the horizon. ATC, Flight 482. You are cleared to land. Runway 1. Winds 210 at 2, gusting 34, cleared to land. Harris confirmed, then glancing at her, "You ready?" Emily didn't answer. She just adjusted her grip on the controls and took a slow, steady breath. The approach was brutal. Crosswinds shoved the plane off course, and Emily had to bank slightly into the wind to keep the center line in sight. Her arms ached from the constant corrections. Harris called out airspeeds and altitudes in a calm, clipped voice, like a metronome keeping her steady. 200 feet, 150 knots. Hold it, hold it. Rain streaked across the windshield, wipers working. Furiously, the ground rushed closer, the runway lights growing brighter. At 100 feet, the wind slammed into them from the left, jolting the plane sideways. Gasps erupted in the cabin. Emily's instincts kicked in. She banked gently into the wind, straightened at the last second, and flared the nose up just enough to soften the landing. The tires screeched against the wet asphalt. For one terrifying heartbeat, the plane swayed violently. Then the landing gear gripped and they were rolling safely down the runway. The cabin erupted in applause, cheers, and tears. Emily sat frozen, hands still gripping the yoke. Her breathing, ragged. Harris reached over, squeezed her shoulder, and said the words she'd remember forever. Greater than you just saved 211 lives. Emily, welcome to the club. The Boeing 777 slowed to a gentle roll after the screech of its landing gear faded into the rain-soaked runway. Emily barely noticed the cheering at first. Her heart was still pounding, her breaths short and sharp, her eyes fixed on the string of runway lights rushing past. The engine's deep roar filled the cockpit until Harris brought the thrust reversers back and the aircraft eased to taxi speed. Only then did she hear his voice beside her, low but certain, telling her she could finally breathe. The cabin behind them began to stir. First it was a few claps, then more, and within seconds the entire plane erupted into applause. Passengers were on their feet despite the seatbelt sign, some clapping so hard their hands must have stung, others crying with relief. A mother hugged her child so tightly the little boy laughed through his tears. A man in business attire wiped his eyes quickly when no one was looking. Emily could feel the heat of the attention through the cockpit door. She hadn't done it for applause, she had done it because there was no other choice. Her parents made their way forward, pushing through the narrow aisle as passengers parted for them. Her mother reached the cockpit first, her hands trembling as they cupped Emily's face. Her eyes darted over her daughter, as if searching for proof she was really there. Unhurt. You flew the plane, she whispered. Emily only nodded. Words wouldn't come yet. Her father's voice broke as he said she had saved everyone, his hand resting on her shoulder like it might anchor her to the moment. Outside, the flashing lights of emergency vehicles bounced off the rain-slick ground as the plane rolled toward the gate. Fire trucks, ambulances, and airport security vehicles lined the taxiway. Paramedics rushed aboard as soon as the doors opened, their boots thudding on the cabin floor as they made for the cockpit. They surrounded Captain Mitchell, still unconscious but stable, attaching monitors and securing an oxygen line. Harris quickly briefed him, making a point to mention Emily's role. One paramedic turned to her, disbelief plain in his eyes when he asked her age. 16, Harris confirmed, 16, and she had landed a fully loaded passenger jet in a storm. As the passengers filed into the terminal, the story was already spreading. Airline staff stared as Emily walked past with her parents. Ground crew members paused from their work to give her nods of respect. By the time she reached the arrival hall, local reporters were waiting, their cameras microphones thrust forward. Someone called her name, asking how she had known what to do. Emily's answer was simple. She said she had remembered everything she'd practiced on flight simulators and that she hadn't let herself think about fear, only the next step she had to take. That night, her face and name were everywhere. Television anchors replayed shaky passenger phone footage of her stepping out of the cockpit, hugging her parents as cheers filled the cabin. News websites carried the headline, "Teen lands Boeing 777. After pilot collapses -211 lives saved." Social media was flooded with praise, disbelief, and gratitude. People across the world compared her calm to that of seasoned pilots. Aviation experts weighed in on talk shows. A retired captain explained that landing a 777 in heavy crosswinds and rain was no simple feat, even for professionals. Another instructor said that while simulators could prepare someone for the basics, the pressure of real lives on the line was something you could never truly simulate. What Emily had done, he said, was rare, remarkable, and worthy of recognition far beyond internet fame. 2 days later, Captain Mitchell regained consciousness in the hospital. His first request was to meet the girl who had taken his place. When Emily stepped into his room, he smiled faintly and reached for her hand. His voice was weak but steady as he thanked her for saving his passengers and him. She shook her head and told him she had only done what anyone would do, that he and pilots, like him, had been her inspiration since childhood. He told her that she had a future in the cockpit if she wanted it, that she had the nerve, skill, and judgment that couldn't be taught in any classroom. In the days that followed, airlines offered her tours of training facilities, flight schools, reached out with scholarships, and strangers wrote to say she had inspired them to face their own fears. But for Emily, the truest moment came when she sat alone in her room back home. The storm far behind her, her hands resting on her lap instead of a control yoke, she thought of the cabin full of faces she had never known but would never forget, and she realized that in one extraordinary hour she had lived a lifetime's worth of courage. Would you like me to now merge all three parts into a single, continuous, 3,000-word full story without breaks, so it reads like a complete short novel? That would make it perfect for publishing or narration.